Hello and welcome to Rando 500, where I review a random game in 500 words. Give or take 10%. Let's go! Wiz and Liz is a 1992 platformer published by Psygnosis for both the Megadrive and the Amiga. The Megadrive version is superior, with enhanced graphics and a fantastic soundtrack by Matt Furness. Wiz and Liz tasks you with rescuing wabbits that have been whisked away by a wogue spell across a variety of stages and 3 difficulty levels. Along the way, you must complete very British-sounding incantations by collecting letters dropped by wabbits, as well as obtaining fruit that can be used to craft spells. Aside from a few bosses, there's no enemies in the game. Your biggest adversary is the time, which is extremely tight. In many stages, you'll be finishing up with around 2 or 3 seconds left. You can play as Wiz the Wizard or Liz the Liz Witch. Both control the same and neither has any advantage over the other. The artwork depicts the 2 protagonists as decrepit old fogies, but they whiz around the place like Usain Bolt with a firework up his arse. The controls are extremely tight considering the speed, and you'll rarely find yourself blaming them for your mistakes. The game starts out easy, but in the mid and high difficulties things get really challenging. More and more obstacles are thrown at you, such as hollow letters that remove a character from your spell, as well as suicide wabbits. That's right, later on you'll be accompanied by a flashing fairy that points towards a flashing wabbit that'll explode if not quickly collected. It's completely unexpected, and I was genuinely shocked that this cute game would literally blow up a wabbit. Once you've dealt with your trauma, you'll notice that this puts you back to square one with your spell collection. And don't forget, this is all timed. Collected wabbits drop fruit for mixing up spells in between stages. Spells require 2 fruits and they can be stored for a limited time before they disappear. You'll need to take notes of recipes because the game provides no clues. Spell effects range from unlocking a shop, skipping levels, changing wabbit colours, minigames, and fake deaths. After clearing the stages, you fight a nightmarish boss. This is the only time you can take damage, and if you lose a life, you've got to go and do the last stage again, which is a rare instance of padding in the game. As you attack the boss, they'll show the damage taken, making them look even more horrifying. This is creepy, isn't it, Mr. Moon? Ooh. When the boss is defeated, you get an ending sequence which encourages you to try the next difficulty. This is my biggest problem. While Wiz and Liz is very much pick up and play, it's extremely difficult. At a certain point it crosses the threshold from challenging to frustrating, and the fun starts to wane. Wiz and Liz is still a fantastic game and has an arcade-like addictive quality. I don't care for the higher difficulties, but I have a lot of fun with the medium ones. Give it a go. It's a solid 8 out of 10. Hello and welcome to Rando 500, where I review a random game in 500 words. Give or take 10%. Let's go. Mick and Mack as the Global Gladiators is a 1992 run and gun by Virgin Games. One day, Mick and Mack are sat in a restaurant full of people with no torsos. While reading their Global Gladiators comic book, Ronald McDonald appears from beneath the floor and whisks them into the world of the comic. An extremely dangerous world full of monsters and bottomless pits. Thanks, Ronald. You can play as Mick or Mack, but there's no difference between them other than skin colour. And if you're thinking about my baby, it don't matter if you're black or white. Points off for controls. Button 1 jumps and button 2 shoots. It's like flipping A and B for a Mega Man title. While it doesn't take long for you to adjust, I wonder why this decision was made with so many good games available to reference. Your kid is equipped with a weapon called a goo shooter. This weapon is used to clean up the 4 worlds through which you'll travel, though I'm unsure how blasting goo like your Peter North will clean up anything. The weapon itself is problematic as it doesn't shoot directly forwards but in a short, weird arc. You do have some aiming control which can help reach enemies placed above and below. Most enemies only take 1 hit, but these slime machines take about 20 seconds to destroy, all the while your kid looks bored out of their mind. Gameplay runs at a low frame rate. making the game feel unresponsive. It's especially noticeable when jumping, as you maintain all of your momentum without pushing any directional buttons. You need snappy control to correct your trajectory, and it's just not there. Each level has a quarter of McDonald's arches to collect in order to clear the stage. Ronald won't let you pass otherwise, bastard. Arches aren't abundant, so if you don't take your time to collect them, you'll need to backtrack to get some more. Isn't this fun? If you collect enough, you can play a McBonus stage, the premise of which is put the right thing in the right bin. It's boring, but a good way to get an extra life. Something you'll need considering this game's difficulty. Stages are littered with sneakily placed enemies, either obscured or ready to attack you the millisecond they're on screen with a barely visible projectile, as well as bottomless pits and other one-hit hazards. Fortunately, the music in the game is pretty decent. While the compositions are average, Mick and Mack demonstrate some fantastic use of the Master System sound chip, with punchy drums, and a rarely used mode that provides actual bass notes at the expense of percussion. Sadly, there's only a handful of tracks, and by the end of the first world, you'll have heard them all. Was Tommy Tallarico not being paid enough? Get this man a box of chicken nuggets! Stat! I don't understand the game's environmental message either. In one stage, you're cleaning up a polluted forest, and in the next, you're slaughtering the local wildlife. Mick and Mack is hardly a whopper of a flopper, but it's more of a McMess. Give it a try if you're craving some weird 90s nostalgia, but avoid if you want to play a good game. 5 out of 10. Hello and welcome to Rando 500, where I review a random game in 500 words. Give or take 10%. Let's go. Earthworm Jim 2 was released for the Sega Saturn in 1996. It sets out to one-up almost every aspect of the original, but it falls short. Overall, the graphics have improved, but they lose some of that pixel art charm and look more like digitized animation cells. Jim retains his gun and whip, but he's joined by a new sidekick, Snot, who grants him extra abilities. The Snot swing replaces the whip swinging mechanic from the original and is much easier to use. Snot can also be used as a parachute for difficult terrain. There are new weapons to collect like the 3-finger gun and barn blaster, but you won't get many chances to use them due to the game's structure. Earthworm Jim 2 focuses on style over substance, and as a result, feels more like a minigame collection rather than a coherent adventure. Level 1 tricks you into thinking you're getting an amped up version of the 16-bit original, but quickly changes things up in the next stage. Lorenzo's soil equips Jim with a new drill gun to help dig his way out of the earth. The level was actually quite impressive for the time, as it had destructible and transforming environments. It's a little bit janky as, being a Dave Perry game, the collision detection is less than stellar. After this level, you're thrown into the cold bucket of wank that is puppy love. Its premise is simple. Psychro will throw puppies out of a window, and Jim has to bounce them over to safety. Occasionally, he'll throw a bomb that Peter Puppy will lob back at him. Easy, right? Wrong. The collision detection on the marshmallow is horrendous. The puppy patterns can be impossible to manage, the stage lasts for far too long, and it's repeated 3 times throughout the game. Other than a difficulty hike, there's no difference between each stage. How unbelievably lazy. This should have been a bonus round, not a core level. The further the levels stray from the game's roots, the worse they get. The Flying King is a very poor Zaxxon-esque shooter in which you'll transport a bomb to the end of the stage. You're swarmed by enemies, and each time you shoot one, you run the risk of detonating your bomb and having to go all the way back to the beginning. Tommy Tallarico returns for the soundtrack, which, while decent, lacks variation. Lorenzo's Soil is the highlight of the soundtrack, and the 32-bit version is the best. However, it does reveal just how heavily it was inspired by Enigma's Sadness. The rest of the soundtrack is quite a letdown, as out of 14 tracks, at least 6 are just classical songs by other composers. It makes me wonder what Tommy was actually paid to do. Sound effects are also really annoying, especially for Jim. Hearing him say, "Wow!" every time you take damage grates on your nerves fast. While Earthworm Jim 2 tries to improve on its predecessor, it falls flat on its face in almost every way. The game is playable, but I have to deduct massive points for puppy love alone. I give it a 3 out of 10. Avoid this and play the original instead. Hello and welcome to Rando 500, where I review a random game in 500 words. Give or take 10%. Let's go. B.O.B is a 1993 side-scrolling run-and-gun developed by Grey Matter Incorporated for the SNES. I have no idea what B.O.B stands for, but I do know he can't drive for shit. B.O.B crashes his dad's car en route to a hot date, and the whole game is basically you leaving the scene of an accident 3 times. B.O.B controls well, and the game makes great use of the SNES controller, with the shoulder buttons allowing for quick weapon switching, as well as one-button access to the fist! More on that later. B.O.B's jumps feel floaty, and crouching isn't as simple as it could be. Instead of a traditional crouch where you press and hold down, you go into crouch mode. This mode is useless as you can't jump, aim up, or use your support items. B.O.B has access to a varied arsenal, including the triple shot, rocket launcher, and wave gun. Weapons have limited ammo, including your starting gun. Once out of ammo, you'll have to rely on the fist, which, although weak, isn't Resident Evil knife levels of useless. You can satisfyingly lamp smaller enemies off screen, but for larger enemies, melee simply isn't an option. And that's everything good I have to say about B.O.B. Hot take alert. This game is awful. I hate it, and here's why. Despite the aforementioned floaty jumping mechanics, the game still decides to throw fall damage into the mix, the trigger for which is even lower than in Bubsy, which was set on Earth. I think. For a space-themed adventure, it's unnecessary, and one of the many ways in which the game's difficulty is inflated. Enemies are also a real pain in the dick. They'll either snipe you from just off screen or get all up in your shit, quickly draining B.O.B's life. The level designers had a fetish for long corridors filled with these crab bastards that glue themselves to you before you have the chance to fire off a shot. The game suffers from serious pacing issues that can only be attributed to developer laziness, low budget, or a mixture of both. Each world consists of 2 level types, each of which are recycled throughout, with lazy palette swaps in an attempt to keep things fresh. It took me well over an hour to complete the first world, and half an hour before I even encountered the first mini-boss. By now, you'll have heard the main theme of the game at least a dozen times, and you'll continue to hear this theme every other level for the rest of the game, including the credits sequence. Were they that lazy, or was this the composer's magnum opus? Another weird thing is that the music slows down when sound effects play. Most likely a naff sound driver. I could seriously go on for an hour about all the things wrong with this game, and it boils my piss whenever I see it get called a hidden gem. It's not a hidden gem, it's an obvious turd, and the only reason it doesn't get more flack is because it's so painfully average that it doesn't stand out from the awesome possums of the time. Take B.O.B and put him in the bin. 2 out of 10.
Oh fuck, I can't believe you've done this.
Hello and welcome to Rando 500, where I review a kinda random game in 500 words. Give or take 10%. Let's go. Ada Wong is my favourite female character in the Resident Evil series. She's strong, smart, and is the size of an average human mother. Ada's motives are shrouded in mystery. She tends to work for the baddies, but always ends up helping the good guys, especially if the good guy has a grade A fuckboy hairdo. When Resident Evil 4 released on the GameCube in 2005, the only playable Ada content was a time attack minigame in which you had to collect Plaga samples. Ada didn't even wear her signature red dress, choosing generic combat gear instead. It's slightly more realistic, but Resi 4 ain't about that life, hun. Later that year, Resi 4 was ported to the PS2 with a meaty injection of bonus content. Included was Separate Ways, a canonical scenario detailing what Ada got up to whilst Leon was cracking one-liners and babysitting Ashley. In Resi 4, ex-RPD hunk, not that hunk, Leon goes to Spain to find the president's ballistics-equipped daughter.
How rude!
And murders hundreds of Spaniards along the way. Leon defeats the baddies, turns down sex with Ashley, and has an awkward jet ski ride back to America. Separate Ways reveals that Leon was being assisted by Ada right from the start. The bingo bell that saved him from being butchered by ganados in the village was rung by Ada. In fact, many key items were placed there by Ada for Leon to collect. It goes to show that behind every strong man is a bitch in the red dress. Ada's mad weekend in Magaluf takes you across most of the key locations in the main game, in addition to extra areas, like this dock full of high-power weaponry, and this flaming tunnel. Ada can take different routes thanks to a hookshot, though I feel it could have been further utilised, like in the intro cutscene. Gameplay differs just enough to make it feel like a fresh adventure. Ada moves quicker than Leon, but takes a lot more damage, easily being killed in 2 to 3 hits. Having some kind of dodge maneuver would have been useful to highlight how nimble Ada is. The merchant isn't fully functional either. While you can buy and sell as normal, you can't upgrade your equipment, which means you start off stronger than normal, but end up weaker towards the end. Separate Ways ends up being a short but sweet challenge, and ends with a harder last boss than that of the main game. Sadler is a colossal twat, and can easily kill you if you don't cheese him with your best weapons. After he's dead, you become a tosser of the rocket launcher. Resident Evil 4 has been re-released so many times across so many platforms, it's easy to forget that the PS2 version was, at the time, the ultimate version. Separate Ways is a fantastic addition to the main game, and these days, this kind of free content on a new game is unheard of. I know if you're watching this, you'll own it for at least 2 or 3 platforms, but when did you last play Separate Ways? Give it a go, it's a solid 8 out of 10. Hello and welcome to Rando 500, where I review a random game in 500 words. Give or take 10%. Let's go. Hey boy, I'm gonna make this simple for you. You can either remove your rose-tinted glasses yourself, or I can slap them off your face, because we need to have a proper look at Cool Spot on the Sega Megadrive. Cool Spot was shot out of Virgin Games in 1993. As a tea-swilling, crumpet-eating Brit, I had no idea that Spot was the 7-Up mascot in the USA. You wouldn't even know there was a 7-Up connection unless you checked the back of the box. Over here we had Fido Dido, who always reminded me of a cross between Doug and Pepper Ann. Spot's friends have been locked away by wild, wicked, wily Will, and it's up to you to save them using the power of carbonation. Will is never mentioned in-game, nor does he make an appearance, so unless you have the exposition-filled manual, the Spots could have been locked away by Santa Claus for all you know. Cool Spot's gameplay shares a lot of similarities with Mick and Mack as the global gladiators. In fact, I'm pretty sure it uses the exact same engine. Spot can run, jump and fire his cool shot in 8 directions. At the end of each level is a cage containing one of Spot's mates, who can be released once a certain percentage of cool points have been collected. Just like Mick and Mack having to collect a certain number of Mackie D archers before Ronald will let them escape from their nightmare. By collecting additional cool points, you can enter into a bonus stage set within a bottle of 7-Up. Here you can collect extra points and letters that spell either Uncola, the 7-Up slogan at the time, or Virgin if you live in Europe. I'm not going to make a virgin joke because I'm not a virgin, unlike you. These letters act as continues, and you'll need them because Cool Spot delivers wonderfully on that bullshit virgin game design. Dave Perry games almost always suffer from confusing stage layouts with little clue as to what you can and can't stand on or pass through. You have classic dickheadish enemy and hazard placement with many instances of unavoidable damage. There are also an unforgivable number of blind jumps, many of them appearing in stages where missing a jump leads to instant death. The game has 11 levels, only 7 of which are unique. Once you reach level 6, the game cycles back through 4 of the previous stages, with the addition of a fairly naff train level. Is this a potential puppy love padding precursor? Music is bog standard Tommy Tallarico fare. If he's not arranging a pre-existing song, the music is forgettable and there's not much of it. The intro song for the game is just a gems arrangement of Wipeout, giving a hint that the rest of the soundtrack is bereft of any musical identity. The song for levels 5 and 7 is potentially one of the most annoying songs I've ever heard in a game. Like many 90s Virgin games, Cool Spot looks great at first glance, the graphics are fantastic. Unfortunately, beneath all that is a shallow, lazy and forgettable platformer with uninspired level design. Drink water and avoid this one. It gets a 4.75 out of 10. Hello and welcome to Rando 500, where I review a random game in 500 words. Give or take 10%. Let's go. Tomba is a 1998 2.5D platformer, starring a feral child whose prized possession has been pinched by a parade of pilfering piggy pricks. He'll have to save the land from the 7 evil pigs in order to get it back. It's worth noting that the European version's intro theme, No Sweat, was by a now forgotten UK boy band called North and South. They had a TV series on CBBC around the time of Tomba's release that detailed their exploits in forming a band in order to fuck bitches and get money, whilst avoiding the school bullies and doing well in their exams or something. Despite only wearing shorts, Tomba is well equipped for his adventure, being able to run, jump, climb, swim and attack with his teeth or his blackjack weapon. The controls are simple but solid. Movement feels natural, but grabbing onto certain platforms and enemies feels slightly clumsy. You'll regularly encounter missions known as events in-game. Completing them advances the game or gives you rewards, such as Baron, the flying dog, who provides free fast travel. Many of these events remind me of point-and-click adventures. You'll be carrying stuff around for ages with no clue what it's for. This dwarf said she left something important in the forest. Well, I happen to have a mirror that I found in the forest, but apparently, this isn't right. Turns out I need to use a bucket I found elsewhere to collect water to put out a fire in the forest, revealing a baked yam. That's what she left, and when you return it, she thanks you with a fart.
How rude!
Most areas you visit are cursed by one of the evil pigs. To break the spell, you need to find a coloured evil pig bag and its corresponding evil pig gate. Once you've found a pig, you need to chuck them into the bag, which is sometimes easier said than done due to the wonky throwing mechanics. As you go along breaking the curses, you get to experience the results of your good deeds, like turning the bewitched mice of Bacchus Village back into humans, or stopping the dwarf forest from looking like the inside of a gumball machine. You'll make plenty of friends along the way, like Charles the Monkey, Mizuno the Witch, and a bunch of beardy old men. By the end of the game, everyone fucking loves you and it's genuinely wholesome. I find the graphics to be charming. They remind me of Klonoa, which itself was a masterpiece. While Tomba's environments don't bend and twist as much as those in Klonoa, they do contain multiplane levels for added depth and exploration. The music's well suited to the game, and there's plenty of variation, but other than No Sweat, if you're lucky enough to live in Europe, there aren't any iPod-worthy bangers on the soundtrack. It really knocks me off that Tomba and its sequel sold so poorly, because it could have been a fantastic series. On the upside, we still have a very solid game that, in my opinion, has withstood the test of time. It's far from perfect, not quite a quirky masterpiece, but well worth a playthrough. I give it a 7.75 out of 10. Hello and welcome to Rando 500, where I take a look at a kind of random game in 500 words. Give or take 10%. Let's go. Asterix and Obelix, or just Obelix going off the title screen here, was developed and published by Infogrames for the Nintendo Game Boy in 1995 and has the honour of being the first Game Boy game I ever played. I have vague but fond Christmas Day memories of shoving this cartridge into my Game Boy, turning it on and saying, I can't see shit. Gotta love that classic Game Boy screen. The game was based on the Asterix comic book series, which details the adventures of the Gauls Asterix and Obelix as they travel the world and fight against Caesar's army. The game's intro has translation issues and doesn't make an awful lot of sense. Caesar has turned Donald Trump by building a wall around the Gaulish village in order to keep them prisoner. That makes sense, but then Asterix and Obelix bet they can travel all around the Roman Empire, bringing back souvenirs for Caesar? Yeah, thanks for walling us in and making Rome great again, Caesar. We brought you a cranberry-topped pork pie from Daventry. The actual plot is that Caesar does build a wall, but Asterix and Obelix travel the Empire as an act of rebellion against Caesar, bringing back souvenirs as proof, not as gifts. Obelix is a fairly standard platformer with a decent selection of enemies and Mario-esque blocks full of goodies. You can play as either Asterix or Obelix, and the differences are mostly in the hitbox department. Good luck hitting enemies first time with Asterix. His hitbox is wackier than a clown's back pocket. The Olympian enemies in the Greece stage have horrendous collision detection. You'll literally be up in the face, fist overlapping the nose, but the hit won't register. They can hit you no problem though. Positioning yourself to land a hit is an exercise in frustration as movement feels so sluggish. Even ducking is slow. At the end of each world, you'll face a challenge, like playing rugby, freeing a banker from a safe, or competing in the Olympics. You're not given any instructions for any of these stages, and failing them results in losing a life. It is clear that a lot of attention went into the graphics and music. Each stage has unique graphics, a rarity for an original Game Boy title, some even containing full parallax scrolling. The soundtrack is great. Whoever composed the music knew their way around the system's sound chip and made good use of it. There's some fantastic tracks that manage to sound extremely rich considering the hardware. It's unfortunately the minigames, their difficulty and lack of guidance that sour the experience for me. You end up wasting lives just trying to figure out what's going on each time. The Olympic stage is where I threw in the towel. Your opponent always performs perfectly, and if you cock up just once, you've fucked it. I've seen enough. I'm satisfied. It's disappointing because the rest of the game is competent and full of charm. Is it worth a playthrough? Well, probably not. It's an average game in a sea of good ones. If you're a hardcore Asterix fan, give it a go. If not, pass and play one of the many other platformers on the Game Boy. 5.5 out of 10 from me, lads. It's time for Animaniacs. I'm about to spit some facts. You may think the game is easy, but it's brutal to the max. It's Animaniacs, and it has hacks. Hello and welcome to Rando 500, where I take a look at a kinda random game in 500 words. Give or take 10%. Let's go. Remember when Konami wasn't a shit heap of a company? When they cared about their franchises, even the licensed ones? Let's hop in the time machine and go back to 1994 when Konami was still on form. Animaniacs on the Sega Megadrive was released in line with the TV series of the same name and details the adventures of the Warner brothers and sister, Yakko, Wakko, and I think this one's called Riley Reid, as they collect pieces of TV and film memorabilia in order to open up a pop culture shop. There are 5 movie sets to explore, parodying films like Indiana Jones and Star Wars, as well as westerns and horror movies in general. Also, it wouldn't be a Konami game if it didn't reference other Konami games like Gladiators and Castlevania. Castlevania might be a stretch, but that is Dracula, isn't it?
How about you?
Unbelievably, Konami ripped the gameplay concept directly from Sonic Heroes, released 9 years later. You can cycle through the trio at any time, with each sibling having a unique ability. Yakko can push and pull boxes and is equipped with a paddle ball, which will be your main method of attack. Wakko has a big, slow hammer that can destroy obstacles and light fuses. Finally, Riley is able to blow kisses, which can open up new routes. The game does a good job of keeping you switching characters, but Yakko tends to be the most useful due to his paddle ball and the abundance of box puzzles. The game itself is brutal. It's like Konami forgot that children were the target market. You only have 3 lives on standard difficulty, and although you have unlimited continues, you have to start right back at the beginning of the stage if you use one. The stages aren't short either. Each one takes between 5 and 10 minutes to clear, which is a significant amount of time if you're a semi-functioning adult like me. The levels are full of jumps that require you to stand right at the edge of a platform to clear. I'm talking hanging on by pixels, as well as those aforementioned box puzzles. Some of them really require you to think hard, and that was simply beyond the reach of my chubby little 6-year-old brain. On a more positive note, the graphics are perfect. There aren't any Konami brand special effects, but they're not necessary for this sort of game. The animation is spot on, and the characters look like they've jumped straight from the TV show into your Mega Drive. Each stage has a variety of music which helps keep things feeling fresh. How about that, Tommy Tallarico? The tracks are well composed, but nothing I'd put on my iPod. There's even one of the most convincing fiddle patches I've ever heard come out of a Mega Drive. Despite its insane difficulty, Animaniacs is still great. It requires a slow and methodical approach with a huge amount of patience. There's no way you'll clear it first time, and it'll challenge you every step along the way. I give this one a very solid 6.5. Good night, everybody. Hello and welcome to Rando 500, where I take a look at a kinda random game in 500 words. Give or take 10%. Let's go. The Sims Bustin' Out, released in 2003, is like the gooch between the bollocks of The Sims 1 and the arsehole of The Sims 2. It was a console-exclusive release designed to placate PC-deprived fans and to bridge a gap between the 2 main entries. Today we're taking a look at the Game Boy Advance version. The intro explains that you've moved from Sim City to Sim Valley for the summer. Is this trademark symbol really necessary? Thanks for shagging my immersion in the name of trademark law. Once you're given the reins, you'll notice that unlike the main Sims games, and even the home console counterparts, you have direct control over your character rather than using a cursor. It works much better for a controller, but you can easily get snagged on the scenery, especially when using your Tuta Scooter. The other thing you'll quickly realise is that this game is ugly. The GBA was burdened with a slew of games full of shitty pre-rendered graphics that look awful on anything other than a GBA screen. A lot of the assets are just dithered messes that beg to be cleaned up. Look at this alleged chicken statue. It looks like someone shat on a kebab. Finally, maybe 10 minutes in, it should hit you that this is barely a Sims game. There's no build or buy mode, no free play and no fast forward, the latter being a real issue when you're skill building later in the game. There's a Diet Coke version of the needs system present, as well as a super basic socialisation system that lets you go from acquaintance to lover in 2 or 3 conversations. Despite the simple system, it's clear the writers had a whale of a time with the dialogue options. The goal of the game is to become the most popular sim in Sim Valley and move into the most expensive house. Your adventure is split into multiple missions across 5 chapters. They start easy but quickly become more time consuming, especially when the town begins to open up, making it harder to find a particular sim. Along the way, you'll need to make friends with the slightly cliched townsfolk, play mini-games to make money, reopen a nightclub, catch a murderous rooster, and more. While I hold a lot of nostalgia for this game, it's the first game I ever put onto a flashcard. I must admit there are plenty of irritating things, the Velocirooster being one of them. This satanic bastard randomly spawns around town and will knock you flat on your ass, sending you straight to the hospital if it manages to catch you. It wrecks your needs and overall adds a foul note to the experience. You've also got Giuseppe, the resident hamburglar who robs your house from time to time. In this particular playthrough, he nicked my bed and my toilet, forcing me to shit and sleep at my uncle's until they randomly came up for sale again. Do I recommend this game? Kinda? It's quite shallow and becomes very tedious towards the end, but it's full of that charm that you only really got in The Sims 1. It's a really interesting relic, and one of the last times the Sims franchise really embraced its first entry. The 6.25 out of 10.